great leadership in this time across all levels. This is honestly what I would say. I think there's, if you said
The crown jewel of the WNBA is about to walk away. And when she does, she won't be coming back. Right now, at this very moment, lawyers and agents are reportedly finalizing paperwork that could end American women's basketball as we know it. The name on those documents? Caitlin Clark. The destination? Somewhere across the Atlantic Ocean where they actually pay their superstars like superstars. This isn't a rumor anymore. This isn't leverage. This is a loaded gun pointed directly at Commissioner Kathy Engelbert's desk, and the trigger is about to be pulled. For the last 8 months, the WNBA has been riding the highest wave in its 27-year history. Record attendance, sold-out arenas, a media deal worth billions with a B. All of it built on the back of one player who changed everything overnight. But here's the part that's going to make your blood boil. That same player was being paid like an intern. While the league pocketed millions, Caitlin Clark was earning $76,535. Not per game, not per month, for the entire season. That's less than what some NBA assistant coaches make in a single week. Less than what a mid-level college football coach earns in 2 months. Less than what the league itself was charging for premium courtside seats to watch her play. It was exploitation dressed up as opportunity, and everybody knew it. The league told us to be patient, that the real money would come later, that this was just how the system worked. But what they didn't count on was Clark's team doing the math. And when they did, the numbers told a story of disrespect so deep, so systemic, that it couldn't be ignored any longer. So when the WNBA Players Association opted out of their collective bargaining agreement earlier this year, it wasn't just a formality. It was a declaration of war. The players were done being grateful, done accepting crumbs while the owners feasted. They wanted their fair share or they were ready to burn it all down. And for a moment, it looked like the league would finally do the right thing. A historic $2.2 billion media rights deal had just been signed. The money was there. The momentum was undeniable. All the WNBA had to do was open the checkbook and keep the peace. But then the negotiations started. And what happened behind those closed doors is about to shock you. Because according to sources close to the talks, the owners didn't come to the table ready to share the wealth. They came ready to protect their margins, to nickel and dime, to hold on to every dollar like it was the last one they'd ever see. They treated the players, especially the stars, like replaceable parts in a machine they believed would run forever. They made one catastrophic miscalculation. They thought Caitlin Clark needed the WNBA more than the WNBA needed Caitlin Clark. And now, with talks reportedly collapsed and no deal in sight, Clark's camp has activated Plan B. A plan that doesn't include Indiana, doesn't include the United States, and doesn't include a league that refuses to pay her what she's worth. Europe is calling. And the offer on the table makes her WNBA salary look like a cruel joke. We're talking about contracts worth $2 million, $3 million, maybe more per season. Luxury housing, private jets, international stardom without the disrespect. Teams in Turkey, Russia, Spain, and France are prepared to roll out the red carpet and back up the truck with cash. They've seen what she can do. They know what she's worth, and they're not afraid to pay it. But here's what makes this truly nuclear. If Caitlin Clark leaves, she won't be going alone. Other stars are watching. Aya Wilson, Breanna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu. They've all been underpaid for years, told to smile and be grateful while the league profits off their faces, their highlights, their sacrifice. If the number one draw in the sport walks away and thrives, it sets a precedent. It opens the floodgates. And the WNBA, the league that finally had everything going for it, could collapse under the weight of its own greed. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert knows this. She's reportedly scrambling. Emergency meetings, frantic calls, damage control plans being drawn up in real time. Because she understands that losing Caitlin Clark isn't just losing a player. It's losing the future. It's losing the ratings, the relevance, the respect the league just started to earn. But here's the kicker. It might already be too late. Because while the league was busy playing hardball, Caitlin Clark's team was playing chess. And the next move could change women's basketball forever. So how did we get here? How did the WNBA go from its greatest season ever to the brink of total disaster in a matter of months? And is there any way to stop what's coming? Buckle up, because the story behind the collapse is even more shocking than the collapse itself. Let's rewind to the moment everything started to crack. It was draft night 2024. The Indiana Fever had just selected Caitlin Clark with the first overall pick, and the basketball world erupted. This wasn't just another draft. This was a cultural moment. a generational talent entering a league that desperately needed her. The hype was unprecedented. The expectations were sky high. And then the contract details leaked. $76,535 for year one. Social media exploded. Fans were outraged. Analysts were confused. Even casual observers could see something was fundamentally broken. Here was a player who had just shattered every college basketball viewership record, male or female, being offered a salary that wouldn't cover student loans for most graduates. The WNBA's response? Crickets. Then deflection. Then the same tired talking points about building the brand and long-term growth, and the rookie scale is the same for everyone. But Caitlin Clark wasn't everyone. And what happened next proved it beyond any shadow of a doubt. The Indiana Fever, a franchise that had been playing in a half-empty arena for years, suddenly couldn't print tickets fast enough. Their home opener sold out in minutes. Secondary market prices went through the roof. Season ticket renewals hit an all-time high. And it wasn't just Indianapolis. Every single road game became an event. In Dallas, ticket prices jumped 400%. In Las Vegas, the Aces had to open additional sections they hadn't used in years. In New York, Los Angeles, Phoenix, the story was the same. Caitlin Clark was coming to town and everyone wanted to see her. The league noticed. Of course they noticed. Merchandise sales were up over 500% league-wide. Jersey sales shattered records. The Fever's gear alone outsold most NBA teams during the same period. National TV ratings doubled, sometimes tripled. Games that used to air on obscure cable channels were suddenly primetime events on ESPN and ABC. And through it all, Caitlin Clark's paycheck stayed the same. $76,535. Do the math with me for a second. Conservative estimates put the direct revenue Clark generated for the WNBA ecosystem at around $80 to $100 million in her rookie season alone. That includes ticket sales, merchandise, media value, sponsorship bumps, and increased league visibility. Her salary represented less than 0.1% of the value she created. In what universe is that fair? In what business model does the person responsible for explosive growth get paid like an entry-level employee? The answer is simple, a broken one. A model built on exploitation that only survives as long as the players have no other options. But here's what the WNBA owners failed to understand. The world has changed. Women's sports are no longer a charity case. They're a market opportunity. And international leagues have been paying attention. While the WNBA was busy congratulating itself for marginal improvements, teams in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East were building empires around women's basketball. They were investing real money, building state-of-the-art facilities, offering salaries that actually reflected player value. For years, WNBA players have spent their off-seasons playing overseas just to make ends meet. Stars like Breanna Stewart and Brittany Griner have talked openly about earning 5 or 6 times their WNBA salary playing in Russia or Turkey during the winter months. Think about that. The best players in American women's basketball have to leave America to get paid what they're worth. It's embarrassing. It's unsustainable. And it set the stage for what's happening right now. Because when Caitlin Clark's representatives started exploring options after the CBA talks stalled, they didn't have to look hard. The offers came flooding in. Teams from EuroLeague, Champions League, even leagues in Australia and Asia. All of them willing to pay multiples of what the WNBA was offering. But it wasn't just about money. It was about respect. One source close to the negotiations described a meeting where WNBA owners actually suggested that Clark should be grateful for the platform the league provided. Grateful. As if she hadn't just single-handedly dragged the league into mainstream relevance. As if arenas weren't selling out because of her name on the marquee. That's when Clark's team reportedly walked out. Not in anger. In clarity. They finally understood that the WNBA ownership group wasn't interested in partnership. They were interested in control. In keeping player costs low while they pocketed the profits. And that's when the real conversations with European teams began. Now, you might be thinking, but wouldn't leaving the WNBA hurt her brand? Wouldn't she lose exposure playing overseas? 5 years ago, maybe. But not anymore. Social media has changed everything. Clark has over 3 million Instagram followers. Millions more across TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. She doesn't need ESPN to stay relevant. She doesn't need the WNBA's marketing machine. She is the marketing machine. If she goes to Europe and posts highlights from sold-out arenas in Paris or Barcelona, her fans will watch. Brands will follow. Media deals will adapt. The content will travel. The only thing that won't travel is the WNBA's revenue stream. And that's what has Commissioner Engelbert in full panic mode, because she knows what happens if Clark leaves. The casual fans who started watching because of her? Gone. The media deals that were negotiated with the assumption she'd be the face of the league for the next decade? Suddenly worth a fraction of their value. The narrative that the WNBA is finally making it? Destroyed overnight. It would be the most catastrophic loss in the league's history. A self-inflicted wound caused by pure greed. But here's where it gets even more intense. Because Caitlin Clark isn't just considering this move in isolation. She's reportedly been in conversations with other top players. Gauging interest. Building a coalition. What if this isn't just about one player leaving? What if it's the beginning of a mass exodus? Sources suggest that at least 3 other all-stars are monitoring the situation closely. If Clark walks and thrives, it proves the model works. It proves you don't need the WNBA to have a successful career in women's basketball. And it gives every underpaid star in the league permission to explore their options. The WNBA could go from a league on the rise to a depleted shell in a single offseason. All because ownership refused to share the wealth when they finally had it. Now, in the last 48 hours, there have been whispers of a last-ditch effort to save the deal. Emergency meetings. New proposals. Desperate attempts to bring Clark back to the table. But according to insiders, the damage may already be done. Trust has been broken. The disrespect has been felt too deeply. And the European offers aren't just competitive, they're transformational. So what happens next? Is there any scenario where Caitlin Clark stays in the WNBA? Or are we watching the final days of American women's basketball's biggest star? The clock is ticking. And the answer is more complicated than you think. Here's what nobody is talking about. The thing that makes this whole situation even more explosive than it appears on the surface. Caitlin Clark doesn't just have leverage. She has nuclear leverage. And the WNBA is only now starting to realize how badly they miscalculated. Let's talk about the media deal. That historic $2.2 billion agreement with Disney, Amazon, and NBC that everyone keeps celebrating. It was signed in November 2024, right in the middle of Caitlin Clark's transcendent rookie season. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Before Clark arrived, the WNBA's media rights were worth roughly $50 million total over the entire length of their previous deal. After Clark's first season, that number jumped to $200 million per year. That's a 400% increase. Now ask yourself, who do you think those networks were betting on when they signed that deal? What face do you think they imagined when they committed billions of dollars to women's basketball? Here's the uncomfortable truth that's keeping executives up at night. If Caitlin Clark leaves for Europe, those media companies have a very legitimate argument that the product they paid for has fundamentally changed. Some legal experts are even suggesting that her departure could trigger renegotiation clauses or performance guarantees built into the contract. Translation: the WNBA could lose hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe more. And it gets worse, because the media deal wasn't the only thing negotiated with Clark in mind. Sponsorship agreements, expansion team valuations, arena lease terms. Everything was priced assuming the Caitlin Clark effect would continue for years. The Golden State Valkyries are set to begin play in 2025 with a franchise valuation reportedly over $50 million. That number was based on projections that included Clark as a visiting star, filling their arena multiple times per season. What happens to that valuation if she's not in the league anymore? What happens to the planned expansion into Portland and other cities? What happens to the sponsors who committed millions specifically because women's basketball was finally breaking through to mainstream audiences? It all collapses, like a house of cards built on a foundation that just walked away. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Because the reason the CBA talks failed wasn't just about money, it was about control. And what the owners tried to do behind closed doors is genuinely shocking. According to sources who were in the negotiation room, the WNBA's ownership group didn't just refuse to increase the revenue share for players. They actually tried to implement new restrictions, limitations on off-season play, stricter marketing rights clauses, even provisions that would have given the league more control over players' social media and personal brands. Think about that for a second. At the exact moment when players were asking for more freedom and fair compensation, ownership tried to tighten the leash. It was tone-deaf, insulting, and it revealed something crucial. The WNBA's ownership structure is fundamentally stuck in the 1990s. They still think of players as assets to be managed rather than partners to be respected. One player rep described the proposals as plantation economics dressed up in corporate language. That's a strong statement, but when you look at the details, it's hard to argue. The owners wanted to cap individual player earnings from endorsements that used WNBA intellectual property. They wanted to restrict when and where players could appear in media without league approval. They even floated the idea of requiring players to participate in unpaid league promotional events. All of this while refusing to guarantee that players would receive more than 10% of league revenue. For context, NBA players get 50% of basketball-related income. 50%. The WNBA players were asking for 20 to 25%, and the owners acted like that was an outrageous demand. When Caitlin Clark's representatives saw these proposals, they didn't just reject them. They reportedly stood up and left the meeting. Not dramatically, not with shouting. They simply said, "We're done here," and walked out. That was 3 weeks ago. And according to multiple sources, there has been almost no meaningful communication since. The WNBA tried to spin it as ongoing negotiations. They released statements about working toward a fair agreement. But behind the scenes, they know the truth. Caitlin Clark is gone. It's just a matter of when the announcement comes. And here's the part that should terrify the league. She's not going quietly. Sources close to Clark suggest that when she makes her move to Europe official, she's planning to be very public about why. Not bitter. Not angry. Just honest. A detailed explanation of how the WNBA had the chance to do the right thing and chose greed instead. Imagine the headlines. Caitlin Clark explains why she left American basketball. WNBA's biggest star reveals how league failed her. The PR nightmare would be unprecedented, and it would give every other underpaid WNBA star the perfect justification to follow her lead. Because Clark won't just be leaving for more money. She'll be leaving as a matter of principle. A stand against a system that exploits the very players who make it successful. That's the kind of narrative that changes entire industries. Now, the European teams that are courting Clark aren't just offering money. They're offering something the WNBA apparently can't: genuine respect. One team in France has reportedly proposed a contract that includes a $3 million base salary, performance bonuses that could push it to $4 million, complete housing and travel accommodations, a dedicated marketing team, and here's the kicker: equity stake in the team itself. Equity. Ownership. An actual piece of the business she's helping to build. Compare that to the WNBA, where Clark was paid $76,535 and told to be grateful while owners pocketed millions off her jersey sales. Another offer from a EuroLeague team in Spain includes a provision that allows Clark to maintain 100% control of her image rights and social media presence. No restrictions. No league approval needed. Complete autonomy. These aren't just better deals. They're different philosophies entirely. One treats her like a commodity. The other treats her like a partner. But here's the question that's dividing the basketball world right now. Is Caitlin Clark making the right choice? On one side, you have people arguing she owes it to American women's basketball to stay. That her leaving would damage the sport domestically. That she has a responsibility to the next generation of players who need the WNBA to survive. It's a compelling argument. Until you remember one thing. Caitlin Clark doesn't owe the WNBA anything. The WNBA owes her. She brought attention, revenue, and legitimacy to a league that had struggled for 27 years to gain mainstream traction. She did her part. More than her part. And when it came time for the league to reciprocate, to invest in the players who were building something special, ownership chose their own bank accounts instead. You can't ask someone to sacrifice their career and their financial future for a league that won't sacrifice a fraction of its profits to keep them. That's not loyalty. That's exploitation. And the scary thing for the WNBA is that more players are starting to realize it. The group chats are buzzing. The Players Association is hearing from stars who are suddenly very interested in what European contracts look like. The foundation is cracking. Commissioner Engelbert put out a statement 2 days ago calling for patience and partnership. But sources say internally it's chaos. Emergency board meetings. Finger pointing. Owners blaming each other for the hardline stance that's about to cost them everything. Some are reportedly pushing for a last-minute offer to Clark. Something unprecedented. A max contract exception. Special provisions. Whatever it takes. But others are still dug in, convinced that the league is bigger than any one player. That Clark is bluffing. That she'd never actually leave. Those owners are about to learn a very expensive lesson about the new economics of women's sports. Because in 72 hours, if the reports are accurate, Caitlin Clark is expected to make her decision public. And when she does, the WNBA will either breathe the biggest sigh of relief in its history, or watch its future board a plane to Europe. The countdown has started. And what happens next could reshape women's basketball forever? The irony of this entire situation is almost too painful to acknowledge. The WNBA finally got everything it had been begging for. The star power, the media attention, the sold-out arenas, the billion-dollar media deals, the mainstream legitimacy that had eluded them for nearly 3 decades. And they're about to lose it all because they refuse to share. But here's what makes this story even more tragic. This was completely avoidable. Every single part of it. Let's run the numbers one more time because they're so staggering they bear repeating. The WNBA's new media deal is worth $200 million per year. League-wide sponsorships have increased by an estimated $150 million annually since Clark arrived. Ticket revenue is up over $50 million. Merchandise sales have added another $30 to $40 million. That's over $400 million in new annual revenue. Much of it directly attributable to one player. The Players Association was asking for the revenue split to increase from roughly 10% to 20 to 25%. Even at 25%, that would mean players collectively would receive about $100 million more per year across the entire league. The WNBA has 144 roster spots. Even if you distributed that money equally, which nobody was suggesting, that's less than $700,000 per player. In reality, with a proper salary structure, star players like Clark would make $2 to $3 million, role players would make $200,000 to $400,000, and everyone would have financial security and dignity. The league would still be profitable. Owners would still make money. Everyone wins. But the owners looked at that math and said no. Not because they couldn't afford it. Because they didn't want to establish a precedent of players having real power. And now, that greed is about to cost them everything. Here's what the dominoes look like if Clark leaves. First, media partners start asking questions. Disney, Amazon, and NBC didn't pay $2.2 billion for a league without its biggest star. Renegotiations begin. The WNBA's valuation drops by 30, maybe 40%. Next, other stars start exploring options. Aya Wilson is arguably just as talented as Clark, just without the same mainstream crossover appeal yet. But she's been underpaid for years. If Clark is making $3 million in Europe, why would Wilson stay for $250,000? Brianna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu, Eriko Gunbowl, Kelsey Plum. All of them are watching. All of them are doing the same math. All of them have agents who are suddenly fielding calls from overseas. Within one off-season, the WNBA could lose its entire top tier of talent. Not because the players don't love the league. Not because they don't want to play in America. But because staying would mean accepting a system that fundamentally doesn't value them. The third domino is attendance. Casual fans who started watching because of Caitlin Clark aren't going to keep showing up to watch inferior competition. The Indiana Fever, who sold out every game last season, would go back to playing in front of 4,000 people. The league-wide attendance bump evaporates. Fourth, the expansion plans crumble. The Golden State Valkyries, the Portland team, the Toronto franchise that was being discussed. All of those projections were based on continued growth. Without Clark and potentially other stars, those franchises become financial liabilities instead of opportunities. Fifth, and this is the most devastating part, the cultural momentum dies. The WNBA finally had the narrative it needed. Women's basketball has arrived. But if that narrative shifts to women's basketball stars have to leave America to get paid fairly, it becomes a story of failure. Of a system that couldn't sustain success even when it was handed a golden opportunity. All of this, every single catastrophic consequence, traces back to one decision. The decision to treat players like expenses instead of partners. Now there's a counter-narrative starting to form. Some WNBA defenders are arguing that European leagues aren't sustainable. That the high salaries are funded by oligarchs and state-backed entities. That those leagues could collapse at any moment. And there's some truth to that. Russian leagues, which used to pay the highest salaries, became unreliable after geopolitical tensions escalated. Turkish teams have faced financial instability. It's not a perfect system. But here's what that argument misses. It doesn't matter. Because the point isn't that Europe is better. The point is that Europe is willing to try. European teams looked at women's basketball and saw value worth investing in. They saw stars worth paying. They built infrastructure and marketing around the women's game because they believed it could be profitable. Meanwhile, the WNBA, which has a built-in American audience, better media infrastructure, and far more cultural relevance, chose to keep players on poverty wages while owners extracted maximum profit. That's not a business strategy. That's exploitation. And players are finally calling it what it is. Caitlin Clark's potential departure is just the most visible symptom of a much deeper disease. A league structure that was designed when women's sports were considered charity cases, not viable businesses. A ownership mentality that still treats players as grateful beneficiaries rather than essential partners. And here's the most frustrating part. The players have been trying to fix this for years. The WNBA Players Association has been remarkably professional and patient. They've worked within the system. They've promoted the league. They've built their own brands and brought new audiences to the game. They've done everything right. And when they finally asked for their fair share, when they came to the table with reasonable requests backed by hard revenue data, ownership said no. Not, let's negotiate. Not, let's find a compromise. Just no. That's why this moment feels so significant. Because it's not just about money anymore. It's about respect. It's about power. It's about whether women athletes will continue to accept being treated as second-class citizens in their own sport. Caitlin Clark has the platform, the leverage, and apparently the willingness to say enough is enough. And if she follows through, she won't just be changing her own career. She'll be changing the entire landscape of women's professional sports. Because other leagues are watching too. The NWSL in soccer, professional volleyball, women's hockey. They're all operating under similar models where players are underpaid relative to the value they create. If Clark's move to Europe succeeds, it establishes a